Taking time to attend today's webinar. My name is Deepa Pesharudi, and I have been associated with Writer Relocations since the past 25 years. I'm also part of the Green Squad, whose mission is to create awareness about the various sustainability initiatives undertaken at Writer. Let's make this an interactive session. I would encourage everyone's active participation. Feel free to ask questions and engage in discussions. We will have a dedicated Q&A session at the end, so please save your questions for that time. This webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing later. So today's session is titled Act Now to Live Tomorrow. Our Earth is faced with overlapping environmental threats and is nearing a tipping point. We need to work together to diffuse the crisis in front of us, from climate change, biodiversity and wildlife habitat loss, land degradation, ocean pollution, resource depletion, and so on. We have a panel of distinguished experts in the area of environment protection, preservation, and conservation. I would like to invite my colleague from Shillem Institute, Nicole Modi, to introduce you to the panel and take this webinar forward. Over to you, Nicole.
Thank you very much, Deepa. Hi, everyone. I'm Nicole Modi. I am the program manager at Shillem Institute. And on behalf of the Institute, I'd like to welcome you all and thank you very much for participating in this webinar. Since each panelist is a specialist in their field and a treasure trove of information, we've structured the webinar into a series of conversations and questions, which I will ask each panelist as we go forward. Is Karen D'Souza, the family. I will let you know about her anyway. She is the director of the Shillem Institute. She studied international business and economics at the Vrije University in Brussels. Her passion for the environment and concern for the growing global climate crisis and global warming spearhead of Shillem Institute's biggest program, studios that promote sustainable architecture in the Western Ghats. Karen has set up the Shillem Institute and is leading from the front with a focus on research and project implementation, conservation, sustainability, healing, and community engagement. Please join me in welcoming Karen D'Souza. Karen, my first question to you is, given the IPCC's recognition of climate change's impact on ecosystems, how is climate change affecting local communities, particularly in the Western Ghats, and what measures can be taken to mitigate?
Thanks, Nicole. I know you're sitting at Shillem, so you're sometimes going in and out, but for the most part, we can hear you. I just wanted to thank Deepa as well for being here. Deepa, thanks so much for being, hosting this program with us, this webinar. It's very nice to have you here. I also wanted to thank Anish, Dr. Anish Andiria, who's now been a part, who's been contributing to Shillem for the past year. And he's just been really, really generous in terms of his knowledge, his time, and his resources to the Institute, and has really helped us shape a big part of our flagship program, which is the Shillem Collective. Thank you, Anish. Thanks very much for your time.
Pleasure is mine, Karen.
As well today. And of course, to Kate Key, who's been a part of the Shillem Institute's journey for over 20 years now. She's really sort of boots on the ground and real practical knowledge that she's been doing and dedicated her life for so many years now. So we're really grateful, Kate Key, for everything that you do, especially with your focus and knowledge on the Western Ghats. And thanks for being here today as well.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Nicole, back to your question on sort of the International Panel on Climate Change. Yes, we are seeing a lot of now correlation between climate change and ecosystems and how ecosystems are being are being, impacted. I think beyond reports and data, we're also seeing a lot of people, and I think just generally, and I'm sure a lot of people here, even at the webinar attending today, would have witnessed, and seen and felt the impacts more frequently in terms of hotter days, hotter summers, warmer winters, forest fires, and levels of pollution that are just dramatically increasing because of all of these. And so climate change is really also leading to the disruption of the monsoon cycle in the Western Ghats and in India. Typically what we would see of consistent rainfall through longer periods, which enables groundwater levels to be recharged, which enables agriculture, supports agriculture over longer periods, is now becoming smaller and smaller and shorter. And what we're seeing actually is larger periods of drought, high intensity rainfall, but in very short periods, which actually then leads to sort of water runoff directly into the ocean. So we're actually not able to restore some of our groundwater levels. And of course, a lot of these natural disasters are affecting local communities. And we're seeing that, the Western Ghats is one example of, but, there's places in Uttarakhand and all of this across India that you're seeing local communities who really are dependent and are much more closer to the natural place in which they are for their livelihoods, most vulnerable. And it also leads to, agricultural, setbacks because of the challenges that they face with water. So lower crop yields, etc. And this then again leads to migration, into cities, and income disparities, what we're seeing. So I think, India first and foremost has a huge water crisis, which must be addressed immediately. And at Shillem and at the Shillem Institute, what we've been doing is actually very simple, but quite efficient methods of recharging and replenishing some of our groundwater levels through, simple things like stone bunds, gullies, planting in barren areas so that the soil moisture is protected. And also we've been recently now also collecting data on rainfall so that we can understand better rainfall patterns through all of the work that we're doing as well on site. Some of the mitigation measures, Deepa and Nicole, is water harvesting, of course, is huge. This enables the agricultural community in the Western Ghats to actually then allow them that in case, in periods when the monsoon isn't been as effective, they can still have some backup resources, especially now that we're seeing groundwater levels are very low as well. So water harvesting is probably one of the most important things that needs to be done. Sustainable farming practices as well. And another thing that we've been doing at the Institute is more community engagement, and also to a certain extent things that we need to prepare for disasters, natural disasters.
Thank you, Karen. That was definitely eye-opening. I'm going to turn my camera off. I think I'm in a slightly low network place, so you'll be able to hear me better, everyone. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, who is Dr. Anish Andheriya, who will discuss India's changing weather patterns. To tell you a little bit about Anish, he is the recipient of the Carl Zeiss Conservation Award. He is a fellow of LEAD and the president of the Wildlife Conservation Trust. After completing his doctorate from the Institute of Chemical Technology in Bombay, Anish went on to pursue his passion with a master's degree in wildlife biology and conservation from the Natural Center of Biological Sciences in Bangalore. He is a large carnivore biologist with field expertise in predator-prey relationships. He's a fantastic photographer, and if you do not already follow him on Instagram, ladies and gentlemen, I would definitely recommend that you do. Also, please follow Shillem Institute on Instagram, so you can follow the different things that we're doing. So Anish has photographed some of the remotest wildlife reserves in India. In fact, he just told us that he's come back from Western Papua, where he was looking for birds of paradise, and has co-authored 2 books on Indian wildlife. Please join me in welcoming Anish. My question to you, Anish, is as a wildlife expert, can you share insights into how climate change is affecting wildlife populations in India and what conservation efforts are being undertaken to protect these species?
Okay, so can I share a presentation so that it's easier for people to follow, because it's quite a complex subject.
Sure, absolutely.
I can't stop share. Can you see my desktop?
Yes, we can, Anish.
Okay, fantastic. So first of all, climate change, I think fortunately, there are hardly any skeptics left on this planet. But about 10 years ago, a lot of countries were refusing that climate change was one of the most one of the biggest threats to this planet. And that people and countries have been refusing in the past because climate change, although climate changes regularly, so change is a constant when it comes to climate, but the pace at which we are modifying this blue planet is creating a lot of turbulence in the weather systems, which means that the weather is behaving in an erratic manner. No matter where you live, the audience that is here, I'm sure you are finding it very difficult to predict when the seasons are going to come in. India was fortunate that we had three very distinct seasons, and that's the reason why 1.4 billion people can live in this country, because agriculture was very easy. But now it's been raining in months when it should not rain. The winters are warm, summers are cooler. There is in fact, forest fire is happening because the dry seasons are extremely dry. Some of the wet areas have become wetter. As a result, there are floods and so many other impacts of climate. But what we have to understand is that all of it is because of anthropogenic reasons, which means while there is a constant change in climate, as I said earlier, because of the way we are using fuels, which starting from coal, petrol, diesel, and other fuels that we are using, these are non-renewables that I'm talking about. And on the other hand, we are degrading ecosystems because we were not so thickly populated about 200 years ago. Now we are more than 7.5 billion people. The planet is very closed. So it's a fixed area, but the number of people have gone up. With it, their aspirations have gone up. So everybody wants a car, everybody wants a bigger house, everybody wants a farmhouse. So people who have one house, they want a farmhouse. And so we are impinging upon natural ecosystems. So on one hand, we are extracting fuel, which are inert actually. They don't react with the environment, but we pull them out of the earth's crust and we burn them so that we can have electricity and several other things. And on the other side, we are cutting or depleting natural ecosystems. When I say natural ecosystems, it's not just the forest, it's also the oceans, because people generally think as forest degradation as the main reason why the climate is changing. But the contribution of that is about, I would say, 1/5 of the greenhouse gases. But there is huge impact on the sea, and the sea actually generates more oxygen for life on Earth than the forest can. Because the sea is three-dimensional, forests are two-dimensional. Seas are the deepest point on this earth is deeper than the tallest peak, which is Mount Everest, which means the deepest portion of this ocean, of our oceans, is about 12 kilometers. And the Himalayan range, which is the Mount Everest, is about 8.8 kilometers. So the contribution of sea to the climate is massive. So while we are causing this climate change, we have to understand that biodiversity and forests and ecosystems are umbilically linked. Without biodiversity, you will not have healthy ecosystems. Without healthy ecosystems, you will not have the kind of precipitation and the kind of oxygen that other organisms require. Natural ecosystems are therefore the foundations of our planet's climate control mechanism. Wetlands are very important. They store a lot of dangerous gases like methane. For millions of years, dead and decaying plant and animal matter sink to at the bottom of the wetlands, and the reclamation that we do when we fill up a wetland and build a colony there or build a big multi-story building, we are actually pumping a huge amount of methane, and one methane molecule is 22 times more dangerous than one carbon dioxide molecule. The snow-capped mountains are supplying water to almost 20% of Indians. The remaining water comes to us from the mountains and the forests of the peninsular India. So the forests, the mountain, and the water are extremely closely linked. Species diversity is the conveyor belt for all the ecosystem. If you didn't have the kind of diversity, so Karen just spoke about the Western Ghats and the area around the Shilim. That area itself, and I'm sure Ketki will touch upon it, is very, very biodiverse. So people who understand ecology, when they go there, they become like kids in the candy store. Oceans, as I said, have a huge stabilizing effect on the climate. However, because of human beings, because of our growing needs, we are degrading these habitats, and the rise in temperature has started impinging upon the food production. You can imagine what will happen, the fragmentation that is happening in the forest, which means when a linear infrastructure, that is a road or a canal or a railway track or a power line, cuts through a forest, it divides the forest into two. On the other hand, because of millions of people's dependence on fuel wood, a lot of people go into the forest to cut wood so that they can cook food. A lot of our cattle, India has more than 1.2 billion livestock heads, and many of those are free ranging, which means they are left in the jungles in the morning and they are collected back. And when both linear infrastructure and human need join hands, you have both fragmentation and degradation working in tandem. When that happens, it impacts the species abundance. So these maps that you see on the left hand side is the map in 2008, and the red areas are areas where the mean species abundance is low. So if business goes as usual, if we don't try to restore or rewild our areas, our ecosystems, we know that by 2030, the mean species abundance will reduce, which means that the conveyor belt that you need to function for regular functioning of the ecosystems will get damaged. And this is going to have huge implications on the climate, on precipitation, on oxygen generation. The major drivers for impact on biological systems are carbon dioxide. We all know we pump carbon dioxide by cutting the forest and by burning fuel. Temperature, obviously, because of the greenhouse effect, the temperature of this planet is rising slowly. Even half a degree increase in temperature around the equator translates to 12 degrees increase in temperature at the poles. And that's where all our ice is. If that ice melts and a lot of glaciers are cracking, if that happens, you will have sea level rise, which will take away a lot of land. And most of the prosperous financial capitals on this planet are ports, which means they are on the sea. So you can imagine how crippled this planet will be when sea level rises. The precipitation, there is a huge, as I said, up and down in precipitation. Just to give you an example, Nagpur, which is in the center of the country, has received rainfall, 2 to 3 days of rain every single month last year and the year before last. So the kind of impact it has on central India, and that is also a place where a lot of wheat is grown, not only Nagpur, in Madhya Pradesh and Jharkhand and all these areas, a lot of damage because of that. El Nino, you understand, basically, to simplify it, with El Nino, what happens is the southern hemisphere becomes wetter, the northern hemisphere becomes drier than usual, and that has huge impact on a lot of other things, including phenology of species, which I'll talk about. I know we have limited time, but I'm trying to rush through this so that I cover most of these areas. You can always go in and look at Google to understand what I'm talking about. So the impacts these are the predicted impacts on the ecosystems. Nutrient cycles, which means the web of life gets impacted. Productivity, which means the primary productivity of ecosystems goes down, which means the carrying capacity of ecosystems goes down, which means the space available to wildlife is going down, and you will have larger range of animals. For instance, a tiger who can live in about 10 square kilometers will then need about 20 square kilometers, which means the ecosystem will not be able to harbor the same number of animals, it will harbor less than 50% of what exists today. Pollination, very important. We take it for granted, but because of natural ecosystems, you have bees and several other invertebrates which are important pollinators, and they also pollinate 30% of our vegetables. So even today, as I speak, 30% of our fruits and vegetables are pollinated by natural pollinators, and because of climate change, their ecology is changing, and that is having impact on our production. Herbivory is they are very important. The caterpillars of insects, even herbivores, the large herbivores, but they are the foundations of a system. So when a season changes erratically, and a butterfly lays eggs, the right time for the eggs to hatch is during monsoon. But if the monsoon gets pushed, the eggs are already laid, the caterpillars come out, there will be nothing for them to eat. And caterpillars of moths and butterflies are extremely important food for insectivorous birds and so many other small mammals. So that gets impacted. This is just one example. Disease, you know what has happened because of COVID. Forest degradation, dependence of people on wild animals has caused this exchange of pathogens between wildlife and people, and this is only going to increase as forests deplete. But there are so many other diseases like malaria. It was not found in many mountain areas because the temperatures were very low. But today, because of climate change, the temperature has risen. As a result, the mosquitoes have survived the winters, and they can actually go up in higher areas. People out there are not immune to those pathogens, and it has caused havoc in so many different ways across the world. Prey-predator relationship also get hampered. I'm not going to go in great detail. Phenological, I told you, the timing, which means the breeding times of these animals are of a certain season for millions of years. Because of us, the seasons have changed so rapidly that these species cannot adapt to those changing times, and as a result, there is huge impact on the reproduction rates of so many species, both large and small. Range boundaries shifts. Just think that if, say, in the Himalayas, you have a certain belt where a certain type of species is found, and now because of climate change, that conducive environment has actually shifted. So a protected area like a national park was declared because that species lived at that altitude. But now the species has to move up in order to adjust to the changing climate. But that is already taken up by people because that was not a national park. So the range boundaries have shifted, but our national parks and sanctuaries cannot be shifted because around all national parks, for instance, Bombay has actually consumed Sanjay Gandhi National Park. So if tomorrow, if leopards want to move out because the environment inside the park is not okay, there is no place for them to go and they will perish. So this range boundary shifts is huge. Species abundance I've already spoken about. So these are the main reasons why climate is impacting the biodiversity. Carbon dioxide has gone up. Deforestation is happening as a very, very fast rate. Tropics would be warmer and drier. El Nino effect I've already spoken about. Fire incidents, just see, every year 2,800 square kilometers of evergreen forests are being destroyed in Southeast Asia. Actually, it is several million, about 19 million to 20 million hectares of forests are being degraded every single year. Even after COVID, that figure has, in fact, during COVID, people felt that people are being nice to the environment. That was not. In 2021, 21 million hectares of good quality forest has got degraded. So we know that there is problem. The science has told us everything about climate change that we need to know, but our habits and our aspirations are not allowing us to pay attention to this. Land use change, I've already spoken about in many different ways. Pollination, I have spoken about. Ozone depletion, we have tried to control, we have managed that. That is one bright spot in our fight against pollution. But we have to do much more if we have to fight climate change. Ozone has nothing to do with climate, but we have won that battle. We need to do the same and replicate that if we want to fight climate change. This is pretty much, look at this, in 1999, 6,551. So we, in 1800, we used to pump 8 million metric tons of carbon. in 200 years, it went up 820-fold time. So that you can imagine the industrial revolution is what has caused this. There is absolutely no doubt about that. I will see if there is something else that I need to. So today we talk of carbon credits. A lot of people have been speaking about it. But can we also look at other types of credits? And I, as a conservationist, has always felt that the root cause of all our problems and the fact that human beings underplay the problems is because water, which is the most important life-giving source for life on earth, is underpriced. I'm not saying we should increase the price of water overnight because there are a lot of poor people who cannot afford it. But to give you the stats, we are paying 6 rupees for 1,000 liters of water. And all of our water is generated because of natural processes, natural ecosystems. For instance, without forests and mountains, you will not have rivers. 600 rivers in India are either born or are fed by tiger-bearing forests. But because we don't price water correctly, we really don't care about the source of the water, which means we don't care about the forest. So we have to find ways of giving the importance that the source of water requires, which means we have to somehow find ways like payment for ecosystem services, where big cities who are receiving water from rivers that originate in some remote forest in the Western Ghats or the Eastern Ghats will pay for the water in such a way that the local population who live in that forest, their aspiration is met without destruction of the forest. Currently, their aspiration is being met because they go into the forest and try and take wood out of it or sell minor forest produce. But if we are able to pay for those ecosystem services like temperature regulation, precipitation, oxygen, all that we get for free from the water, if we pay that ecosystem services rent to the people who live alongside those forests, we will be able to solve it. Because see, water is required for all our businesses. And if we underprice water, every other product is underpriced. And that is the main reason for the market failure. So we have to look at this NTFP credits, which means minor forest produce, non-timber forest produce credits, biodiversity credits in areas where biodiversity is high. People who can afford there should be some tax levied on it, because it's about the next generation. You and I will probably scrape through, but our children and their children, which means our grandchildren, will find it very difficult. So it is an insurance against a future tomorrow. So this is what, and there are a lot of people who are listening. Some of those are doing business. They're working at senior positions. I urge you to start thinking about these things and find ways of somehow elevating the importance of the natural ecosystems, because those are the ecosystems from where water is generated. Thank you so much. This is my website. And as Nicole said, I'm also on Instagram at Anish Andheria, the handle. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Anish. That was suitably terrifying to understand the realities of where we are at. I don't think anyone realized the kind of wildfire and forest degradation that's taking place. In fact, not just in Southeast Asia, but I think the news has been full of it across the world this year. Europe has gone through it. Of course, the fires in California and the Amazon as well has been burning all of last year. So there's definitely eye-opening. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, our next guest is Ms. Ketki Ghate, who is the founder and managing partner at Oikos for Ecological Services. Hi, Ketki, welcome.
Hi.
Ketki serves as a trustee at the Adivas Foundation, which is an NGO working in the areas of environmental conservation, research documentation, and eco-education. She's very much been part of the Shillem Institute, helping us with ecology studies and sort of also walking through Shillem with us, and is very much part of the Institute. She's a core member at the Ecological Society in Pune, works as the core faculty for a course in ecology there. She's a member of the Joint Forest Management Committee for the Bhamdura Forest Range in Pune. She's also a visiting faculty at BNCA and PVP College of Architecture in Pune. Ketki has been an ex-member of the Pune Tree Authority of the Pune Municipal Corporation as well. Welcome, Ketki, and thank you for being here. So Anish touched upon a little bit about carbon sequestration and methane release with wetlands, and that's actually something I wanted to ask you about. Can you explain how maintaining the health of diverse ecosystems is a strategy of climate mitigation by the establishment of long-term carbon pools? Additionally, is there a comparison that highlights which ecosystems are most effective in sequestering carbon over extended periods?
Yeah. So as Anish talked, I think just to pull the thread from his presentation, so Western Ghats Forest basically has been offering what you can say a great tool to mitigate the climate change. And this is just because of the word diversity. So just because there are diverse forest types, right, from evergreen, semi-evergreen, moist deciduous, dry deciduous. So each of these forests, along with grassland and shrublands, all of them together offer n number of ecological services. I think this particular faculty in ecology is quite new, and since last, I think, just 2 or 3 decades, everyone is concentrating on ecological services or maintaining the ecological services by forests from Western Ghats, and few of which, as Anish was mentioning, so these forests have been offering products as well as services. So say, for example, water is being provisioned by the Western Ghats forest for local people. So, and also purification. So this is a great service by these Western Ghats forests, along with extremely important service to maybe regulate and maintain the temperatures. So they maintain a certain kind of microclimate because of evapotranspiration, which is done by the foliage of this forest. So that's again extremely important service. Means just to maybe for people to relate to this term, which is called as microclimate, maybe you can imagine if you are in a desert and there is a tin shade and there is a huge mango tree, so underneath which you would prefer to just take a rest. So obviously it's a tree, because trees give out water vapor in the form of evapotranspiration. And this, if one single tree is offering that much temperature regulation, you can imagine if it's a group of trees, if it's a huge forest which is spread over a landscape, obviously that's what mitigates the temperature. That's what regulates the temperature. And that's why it's an extremely important service by forests to reduce the temperature. And in this like ever increasing temperatures of Earth in various places, I think this is an extremely important service. And then another thing, like when it comes to products, Anish mentioned briefly about non-timber forest produce. So there are timber like teak and sal, they offer a great timber to entire country. But along with that, there are many minor forest produce like honey and maybe flowers and nuts and resins, which are also equally important. And then along with that, what you asked, Nicole, is all about carbon pools. So Western Ghats forests definitely are extremely important carbon sink. And this is a great strategy to protect this forest, to maintain this carbon sink. So what does they do is they absorb carbon dioxide, and through the process of photosynthesis, they sequester into the woody stem. Yeah, so obviously forest and shrubland, and wherever there is a woody part to in the vegetation, they are the best to sequester carbon. So not that grassland doesn't do that, they also do that, but surely trees does that much more effectively. And then if at all we could just share, Aniket, are you there? Are we going to share the presentation so that maybe I can talk with respect to that? Yeah, so as I think Nicole and Karen mentioned, that we have been working at Shillem Institute, and one recent project that we did is related to carbon sequestration. So this is the potential. This is just to give you the number. So this is one of the research paper. There are a couple of research papers which talk about the total number about carbon which is sequestered within Western Ghats. So it definitely holds 1.23 gigaton. Yeah, it's a huge. So 1 gigaton is 1 billion tons. So that much carbon is definitely sequestered in this Western Ghats forest. And let me tell you, this carbon is not only sequestered in woody part, but it is also sequestered in soil. That upper topsoil layer also sequesters carbon. And there is annual incremental biomass. So every year, obviously, trees grow, shrublands grow, and because of that, some addition is there. So maybe within a year, you may not be able to measure it on a smaller patch of forest, but definitely when it comes to larger Western Ghats, you can see that. And then there is the second point is above ground biomass. That is whatever is there up above ground, and there is certain things in the root mass which is below ground. Then these are certain numbers of soil carbon storage in different forest types. So one of the questions was who does it efficiently. So in this particular table, you can see that tropical wet evergreen forest, basically the trees which are evergreen and they shade the leaves throughout the year evenly, they are the best to sequester carbon. These are the figures of carbon sequestered per tons per hectare. So you can see evergreen forests are 132 tons per hectare as compared to tropical dry evergreen forest or thorn forest, which are 33 tons per hectare. Yeah, but in all average, maybe it's 531 tons per hectare. And maybe you can just remember this particular number of 57 and 171. And then we can go next slide. And then we can try and understand that how the Forest in Shillong Institute are playing some kind of significant role in sequestering carbon. So this is the area of Shillong Institute, which is there in Shillong village in Western Ghats in Pauna catchment. And you can see these colors represent various types of forest. So blue one is a tall canopy forest, and green is dwarf canopy forest. There is a shrubbery with trees, there are sparse shrubbery, and there is scrub. And also obviously the habitats are very diverse, and each of these forests has a significant capacity to sequester carbon. Next. So you can see here that the tall canopy forest is sequestering maximum carbon is 14.8 here at this particular location, along with the soil carbon, which is in percentage, that is 3.5, as compared to scrub, which is just 2.5 at this particular location and 2% in soil. So how does this culminate totally? Maybe we go to the next slide and then we can see. So if you see the total carbon calculations, what does that mean? This total carbon refers to cumulative carbon content within a given ecosystem, encompassing both biomass and soil. Yeah, I talked about it. And then carbon per hectare was calculated by sampling method. So what we actually did was we did quadrats at each of this location, and then from these quadrats we measured girth at breast height. So each tree is measured, and we use certain formulas and programming language like R and package biomass, and from which we calculated the averages. Next. So this is the carbon sequestration in Shillong Institute area. So you can see that this is the total area per hectare, and this is tree carbon per hectare. So our maximum carbon is sequestered by tall canopy forest, which is 68. And if you remember the research paper that we referred to, it also says that if at all it is some kind of moist deciduous or evergreen forest, it should be somewhere in between 57 to 171. So we are fairly well. It's not too bad, but just because we are not right on the crest line, but we are in a zone where maybe probably the mature ecosystem itself could be the mix of moist deciduous plus semi-evergreen. So these numbers are doing quite well. And in all, whatever carbon that maybe the forest and the soils in Shillong Institute are sequestering are around 1 lakh tons approximately. And maybe sometimes it's overwhelming to, just hear this kind of big numbers. You can't relate to it. So that's why we just simply did this maybe graphic that if at all there is a jet plane and which is maybe running for more than 1,000 hours in air, so whatever emissions are caused by that particular aircraft, those can be mitigated by the forest in the Shillong Institute, or maybe some 1,360 cars, if they are running on the road, for 15 years, so whatever carbon is emitted, I think that is sequestered by this biomass and soil in the Shillim Institute. So yeah, so obviously looking at this particular numbers, forests definitely play a significant role in sequestering carbon in biomass and soil. And just to talk, maybe just to summarize this, that why carbon pools are important and how you can translate it into ground, maybe having some kind of ecosystem-based approaches. So one of the very favorite approach is ecological restoration. So if at all you do ecological restoration on barren lands, wherein diversity of various vegetation types is conserved, indirectly you also conserve n number of faunal types, right from microbes to insects to mammals to n number of faunal groups, and that ultimately this diversity is going to help the mitigate climate change. And lastly, the last point, in while we do all these kind of things, it's absolutely worthwhile to engage local communities into that, because they also get indirect benefit from these kind of protected forest or conservation projects, so that they preserve it in long term, because ultimately we have to talk about sustainability. So whatever effort that we do on ground, if at all it has to sustain in long term, I think it is absolutely must that we engage all various stakeholders, whoever are residing in that particular project site. Yeah, so that's all from my side, Nicole. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was also very eye-opening. I mean, who can imagine that kind of sort of carbon present around us? And I guess the forest and the trees and the soil are safeguarding. So I think all the questions that I had prepped have been answered before I asked them, which is a great thing. So thank you so much, Ketki. Thank you, Anish. Thank you, Karen. I'd like to open this discussion to our audience to ask questions if they have any. You can put them in the chat box and we'll take them one by one. Okay, I may have to ask the questions. Anyone, any questions you have for Karen about maybe the Institute? Okay, Karen, I'm going to start with you. I'll ask you a question. You mentioned the Shillim Collective, which was the new project that the Institute is doing. Could you tell us a little bit more about it and what the vision is?
Sure, Nicole. So the Shillim Collective was sort of an endeavor that we've put together with people like Anish, and then there are other advisors and really a group of, people who have spent a lot of their time exploring some of these ecosystems. And so the idea behind the Shillim Collective is really to go beyond the periphery of Shillim and to understand the, how do we protect this region, the larger or the greater Shillim area is what we call it, that looks at sort of water bodies, that looks at communities, that looks at conservation a bit more holistically. I think what we have realized is that for the past 20, 25 years, we've been very much within our periphery of Shillim, and we've been focusing all of our efforts, in terms of conservation within this area. And we've come now to a point where, in fact, there's quite a bit of stability there. And therefore, in order to expand some of our conservation efforts and to, we're kind of going beyond this region, this area of Shillim and really looking at it a bit more holistically. I think what we've realized is also conservation cannot be addressed simply by only through reforestation efforts. I think we've understood that it is important to understand who are the various stakeholders in these very ecologically sensitive landscapes. So from, of course, the biodiversity, which is the largest stakeholder, to the local communities living there, whether it's farming communities or tribal communities, private landholders, so on and so forth. What are the resources as well that are available there? So it takes into account kind of a lot of studies and research to support some of the actions that we're putting forward, almost in a roadmap for this region of the northern Western Ghats. We've also, through some of our workshops that we've done, we have another workshop coming up in January, but through one of the workshops that we did this year, we came up with a few conservation strategies in terms of, just identifying key species, key habitats. And so, for example, one of the things that we was highlighted was the giant squirrel. The giant squirrel is a very endemic species to this region. It's a species under threat, severely under threat. And it's a species that only survives actually in very tall canopy forests. So, as Anish and Ketki spoke and touched upon, and very, very much in detail, was that some of these ecosystems are so fragile and they have such complex relationships within species, between species, and that in turn sort of affects climate patterns. So the loss of every species kind of means exponential disruption to the ecosystem services of those areas, and therefore impacting, local populations, livelihoods. And part of what we're doing at Shillem as well is also through our Green Squad program is kind of reaching out to communities, to young children who I think is really the future of maybe the planet in terms of survival. So, young children have this amazing enthusiasm for learning in nature. So part of what we're doing is taking a lot of these kids into nature, into understanding and exploring these very complex ecosystems so that they in turn feel the need to protect it.
Thank you, Karen. Thanks. That was very enlightening. So we have some questions in our chat box. I am going to alternate between Anish and Ketki, so you guys can both answer. Anish, the first question, as common citizens, and I'm sure you get asked this question a lot, what are the first steps that we can take to protect, conserve, and sustain the environment?
So the first thing that you can do, and you must do, is to encourage your children or your grandchildren. If you have missed the bus and you have not done that with your children, then you should encourage your grandchildren. Take them to the wild, expose them to nature. If you are near a river system, take them there. Show them nature, make them fall in nature. The catalyst is the wildlife. So the wildlife will get them hooked on. And once they start, you need to start talking to them about the problems and also the solutions. Children, we think, should be insulated from the realities of life, but actually it's not true. They are the hardiest. So if there is an accident, most adults will die, but the child will survive because the body is used to take that impact. So children, I feel, don't get traumatized. They are the ones who have to actually fight the ugly battles for what we have done. And so expose them. That's the first thing. Second is, whenever you are planning an avenue tree, the trees that you have in cities, they're not enough. A lot of them have gone because of big roads and all that. So you need to bring them back. But when you bring trees back, they have to be native. So they have to be the fruiting and flowering trees of that local area. So there are a lot of institutes and NGOs like Bombay Natural History Society in Bombay. In every city or small town, there is some NGO or the other. Talk to them. They will tell you what are those native species, bring them back. So you have to bring them back. Obviously, you can't bring them back in the same densities that they existed, but to have them and plan those plantations at a society level, not just your backyard, but also the entire region. Then you will start inviting species back into, and those species are important. Wherever there are big banyan trees, and if there are bat colonies there, bats are not bad omen. And the fruit bats are not carriers of any pathogen. It's only the insectivorous bats in certain areas that you have. So those flying foxes that you see in the evening, those big bats, are actually gardeners of our Eden. Every bat colony, which has about 100 to 150 bat, is pollinating and dispersing seed in an area which is almost 3,000 square kilometers every night. Yeah, so it's very important. Coastlines, mangroves, they have to be protected well. Wetlands, reclamation of wetlands should be opposed, which means there should be protests whenever a wetland is getting refilled or reclaim. Wetlands are, as I told you, very, very important in sequestering carbon. If you don't have place for the trees, grow hedges, small places where small insects, reptiles can live. Water harvesting, important everywhere. Government has made it mandatory, but there are a lot of buildings that are already existing. So there has to be some amount of retrofitting. Also, generate your own electricity. Try and have solar wherever. It's also symbolic to have it. Somebody will understand the importance of it and maybe go to a greater, larger scale. If there are public spaces, open spaces, gardens, make sure that you maintain them, which means that people should not destroy them for development. There should be, again, plantations which are attuned or are in sync with the environment there. Finally, something that we have been hearing since we were children: refuse. Don't use more than what you need. Reuse whatever you can. Recycle that you can. Plastic is a big threat. Try and see how you can eliminate the use of single-use plastic from your life. For a small period, they had banned all that, but they have already started coming in. I see in my tower that I live in, there is a vegetable vendor who brings vegetables, and every single household, they talk very consciously about climate change, but each one of them carry whatever they buy in small plastic bags. So what we've done is we've actually given cotton bags to people. We've told, because we can't shortchange the vendor, but we have to educate the people who are using it. So there are so many things one should do. Don't even imagine that you will be able to change these things overnight, but you have to make a start. Don't feel let down because the problems are just too many. We all started. I am a fluid mechanics graduate and also done my PhD in fluid mechanics. However, I am serving nature. So if I had given up, I would have also been pumping chemicals in this air and earning money. So you do whatever you want to do, but there are ways in which you can repay or you can pay the rent of living on this beautiful planet.
Thank you, Anish. Thank you. So actually there was quite a few questions related to what you just spoke about that have been answered. So the next question is for Ketki first, and then Karen, I'd love you to chime in as well. Are there countries in which students start learning about conserving the planet Earth right from kindergarten? My generation has started understanding the impact of climate change now, but if there is a mandatory course in schools and colleges right from kindergarten, the reversal process could be much faster. Have any programs like this been introduced into schools in India yet?
Yeah, so maybe there may not be any compulsory program for schools, which is absolutely different than the syllabus. But nowadays, means like, say, for example, this new education policies, it definitely has integration of ecological perspective in their syllabus. Or say, since many years we have been having environmental sciences. So to certain extent, with certain maybe loopholes, definitely our government and our schools has been trying to promote this kind of environmental conservation. But yes, but we always keep on talking that even if it is there in the syllabus, maybe our teachers are not yet ready to conduct these kind of activities. So it's high time, along with the syllabus, we also need to maybe do some kind of capacity building for teachers. And about this particular question, that are there any countries? So many countries actually are trying to push this environmental conservation big time for school kids. So one of the leading country, maybe to my knowledge, could be Finland. They are big time into this, and they also teach their kids with constructivist approach. So the way I've just written in the chat box that we also have developed one syllabus named Nisargashala for school kids of 5th, 6th, and 7th grade, in which there are a number of activities, and maybe 50% activities are outdoor. So wherein you take kids actually to the stream, to the river, show them what we are doing with the river. Then they are able to relate. The moment they see the pollution which is going from our houses, the wastewater which is going from our houses is ultimately, ending up into the river, killing the fish diversity or a number of diverse faunal species over there. Then they are able to relate to the lifestyle changes that Anish was talking. So say definitely we need to maybe get in big time lifestyle changes so that we can mitigate climate change, and also at the same time do some kind of land conservation activities. So yes, so I think slowly this is increasing because every nation is now getting hit by this climate change implications. So yes, slow, but it's slow, but of course, I think people like us who definitely are interested in doing some kind of nature conservation, we ourselves can bring in some certain changes in our lifestyle, in our surrounding, and try and spread it as much as possible.
Fantastic, Ketki. Thank you. And Karen, could you please chime in here and tell us about the Shillem Institute Green Squad and what our approach is to this?
Absolutely. I just wanted to add really quickly. I know we have 2 minutes to close this, but I wanted to add that, you know, there are a lot of countries, I think Europe and especially Scandinavia and some of the other countries neighboring are doing a fantastic job at really bringing children out in nature. And one of the things that we want, one of the biggest part of our objectives, one of the biggest objectives, sorry, of the Green Squad program at Shillem Institute is really not just having sort of theory, you know, learning about the environment through a classroom or indoors. It's really about taking children outside, taking them into the environment, letting them see all of these complex relationships that we spoke about earlier. Also, letting them touch, feel. Children develop through the senses, and sensory ways of teaching is very important now. So I think, you know, we are opening out as well a lot of programs at Shillem Institute to the writer community. And that's something that I wanted to say, that we will be over the next month or two sharing a whole list of programs that our writer community, their children can partake in. One of that is the Green Squad. So we'd be very happy to see a lot of you there.
Thanks so much. The questions keep coming, guys, but I think we're going to have to wrap up at this one. We will try and maybe send you all, we've got a note of the comments, we'll maybe send you all replies. We'll get Ketki.
Nicole, I have answered a few questions on the chat itself. So if
Okay, great.
people have asked, you can ask them to look at them again.
Super.
I think, just read out the names. I think Behala, 29, Palli, and Naveen's questions I have answered. Not completely, but whatever I could.
Okay, thank you so much for that. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ketki. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Anish, for your time. And this was definitely an enlightening. Yes, Karen.
Sorry, I wanted to just also reply to Shushma, who's asked about how the writer community can be part of this, all these initiatives. We will be sharing various workshops and programs that we can be part of over the next couple of months. I just wanted to, before we end, thank also Prasun, Yash, who's sitting with me, and Aniket, who've just been, you know, from our marketing team and the Institute team, who've been just amazing in helping us with so much of our efforts, bringing it out there to everyone. We've been for a long time kind of working, but in the back, and now a lot of these programs are coming out to the forefront. It's really thanks to all of you. And of course, to people like Anish and Ketki. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.